Hi, everyone. um, so, obviously, the background has changed. Uh, I think a lot of you know this already, but just to kind of help you guys, just to kind of help some of you keep track, is that obviously I'm getting out of the army. I've already basically finished up with the process, and I've been traveling. So I'm traveling to Arizona, and I'm currently in Little Rock, Arkansas. So yeah, and this is my hotel. But I wanted to talk about something that has always been on my mind, kind of most of the time it's been on my mind in passing, uh, very retroactively and everything. But I just wanted to express that I started thinking about, how we typically conceive of becoming a man as something that is very, I don't know. I would say that, in my opinion, it has been reduced to this idea of almost like a showmanship, right? Like, how manly can I be if I do this or act this way, behave this way, so I can be perceived as somebody that is manly, somebody that has value and so on. So, but the funny thing is that also the culture seems to have like a feedback loop on this perceptive idea of a man. Um, but to be honest, in my experience, if you talk to just if you have any if you talk to just people in general, the concept of being a man is actually rather ambiguous, meaning that if you talk to individuals about, well, what do you think like a man is, what does it mean to be a man, everybody has a different, almost a different answer to that very question about what it means to be a man. But there's also the cultural answer of what it means to be a man. And obviously there's also no if we've been paying attention to the social media culture around us, we understand that the rise of feminism and everything leads to the lost identity of what was typically conceived as being a man. You could say that, let's put it this way: everybody has a different answer to being a man, but we were all using the same kind of framework for that answer. Some of us now, I don't really know how to explain that. Some of you might say, well, what do you mean by framework? Um, the best example I can give maybe would be the feminist critique of, like, you know, that the man's supposed to have the money and provide for the children and the wife's supposed to cook and clean and so on. Like, that would be like kind of like the framework. But you could still say that that would be the framework that people would work off of and still have an idea about what does it mean to be a man. That's basically what I'm saying, is that that would be sort of like the consensual framework that people would work off of. Um, Now, I kind of have like my own critique of that, but it's a different critique in the sense of that, to me, that critique is only viable in the sense of without God. Because I think originally the whole manifestation of the man providing, the woman kind of taking care of the children and stuff, for me that was a framework that was based off of like a God orientation. Now we could say that where the feminist critique actually becomes a viable critique, almost a necessary critique, is when you lose sight of the God principle or the God orientation, and then it becomes like this sort of vain framework. It becomes empty, and actually it becomes an abusive framework, because what happens is, and this is this is a line that kind of came to me this morning when I woke up, was that every single person in your life, every single event, every single situation, they are all the greatest possible means of a path towards God. I'm kind of using Anselm's argument, Anselm's ontological argument here, but in the reverse manner, where every interaction that you have is the greatest possible interaction that is a path towards God, even if the situation or person is an obstacle in themselves. But anyways, my whole point of saying this is that without the original God principle or the decay of the God principle, what you get is you get people using each other as an end. And so this is where the feminist critique is actually viable, in my opinion. Is viable in the sense that without a God orientation, the framework of marriage becomes a feminist critique, because what happens is you have people using each other as an end. So this is where you get all the typical slogans of like patriarchy, colonialism, and so on. With the loss of the God principle, you get that. You get people using each other as an end rather than a means towards God. But in my opinion, this was the original intent of the framework of marriage and everything else. So how am I tying this in with spiritual manhood? Well, and this idea of phallic nature, well, it's exactly that, is that the phallic nature, like the true phallic nature, in my opinion, is actually an ontological giving. And we can use a sexual metaphor, the fact that man sort of creates sperm to ejaculate into the woman, right? It is an ontological charity, but it's not a charity in like, oh, this woman here, this woman like deserves me, or like it's not like this prideful way. What I'm trying to say is that to be a man at all is a dialectical situation of your own poverty. And this is, and the end result of that, well, the whole dialectical manifestation of that is the ontological charity. Because if you don't have this ontological charity as a man, is that what you get is like you get like this penetration. You start using everything else as an end rather than a means. Just to sort of use like more cultural like very explicit understanding would be like, men my age from like 20 to like 30s and maybe even older, uh, typically are obsessed about, okay, how do I, you know, I want to be that kind of man that, has really good sex with women, and women, praise me for my sex giving and all this other stuff, right? So again, it's this concept or idea of like a transaction and also as an end. You're trying to have some sort of like pride, but the funny thing about pride is that you can't maintain pride and your end. Um, and that's kind of like the cultural feedback loop that society doesn't understand in general, is that you can't have pride, you can't keep your pride and keep the thing that you want at the same time. You either get one or the other, or you lose both. And that is actually the dialectical situation that our culture is in, that is in this constant feedback loop where, as human beings, because we've lost sight, in my opinion, of our theomorphic nature. Like we don't even look at ourselves as divine at all. So we have to construct some type of divinity, which is our pride as human beings. Thank you, Dimitri. Which is our pride as human beings, where it's either that woman is garbage, right? And so you should keep your pride and stay as a man. But the thing is with this mindset is that you, society, because of this critique, society will say to you that, well, yes, that woman is garbage. Keep your pride, right? But the thing is, the more that you want to keep your pride, the further you make a divide between the sexes, the further you make you actually manifest the problem of the sexual situation as a real issue, because of this cultural feedback loop that you constantly need to assert and affirm your own sexual, uh, manhood, right? Because the more you affirm it, the more you make a divide between the other sex. But you see how hard this is now, and this is why feminism is such a good example, because the whole concept of mansplaining, right? Mansplaining is this idea that, if it's a man explaining then about a woman's situation, then he, obviously he doesn't know, right? But the paradox of that situation is that when a woman is critiquing a man for doing this, as long as she continuously affirms this, she continuously affirms a divide and a rift between the sexes. Um, so, and what ends up happening is that we actually have no space, no room for this ontological charity. And for me, actually, again, like the true phallic nature is an ontological charity, which means that you are having a dialectical relationship with your own state of poverty all the time. And if you want to have the ability, in my opinion, if you want to have the ability to understand the other sex, you have to be in a state of poverty. Why? Because a state of poverty actually allows room. It allows room for another person. It allows room for another human being. There is nothing that is kind of like in the room, you could say, right? There's not your pride. There's nothing else, right? And when you have when you're constantly trying to create this state of poverty within yourself, you realize that this is the ontological charity. Um, and people naturally, I would say people naturally are inclined towards this. It's just natural that we, because actually what you become is you become a place, um, a home, a guest house, for other human beings. But the thing is, but here's the other problem. So the question arises then, if I'm always being a home for other people, if I'm constantly being a guest house for other people, the cultural feedback loop will say that actually you're being abused, right? And you're being used. Now, I want to make really two distinct things about where that is true and that is not true. If you don't, I'll say this, actually, if you don't have a culture, if you don't have a God orientation, a sort of God principle, then you are being used and you are being abused. Because actually, it's not really them, it's just you're abusing yourself and using yourself. Um, and so, again, in that sense, the cultural feedback loop is correct. Because if you're, because being a guest house, being a place, being the state of poverty, actually is supposed to be a means, not an end. If you use it as an end, you will actually always come across situations or relationships where you do feel abused and feel used. But if you actually use it as a means as approaching a better relationship, with the God principle, right, with the absolute, with the real, uh, with God himself, if you use this as a means to get closer to God himself, then you are not actually getting abused and used. This is actually the means itself to get closer, to manifest that relationship. And this is the paradox, right? That you paradoxically manifest what I would call spiritual manhood. Um, and to me, this is like the real phallic nature that needs to be embraced. But without it, without, in my opinion, without the God orientation, without the God principle, everything is used as an end. As an end. Even if I were to tell you, well, I'm not, even if you were to say, I'm not using it as an end. If you were to strip everything that I'm saying and say, oh, yes, I just want to be a state of poverty, you're going to say that you're using that as an end. And so you're going to constantly come into conflict with your own self, talking about, trying to reassure yourself. But the thing is, as human beings, it's hard for ourselves to reassure ourselves when we are using ourselves as that end. And it's so difficult, So I would say if there's anything that, I've gotten out of this over the past years is that what made my 20s probably miserable, now that I'm 29, almost 30, most of my 20s were made miserable because I used everything was an end. Really, getting the girl, not getting the girl, making sure I kept my pride, kept my dignity. Again, when you try to keep things and you try to keep these ends, that's what you get. You get ends. The relationships don't exist. The relationships end. The woman stops loving you. The people stop talking to you. You stop loving yourself. You stop understanding yourself. You stop caring. You stop loving. I mean, it's just, this whole way of thinking is set on ends. And it's no coincidence, in my opinion, that there's this constant cultural feedback loop that is always encouraging you to go for an end, uh, in either situation. Uh, this idea about, self love and everything. Um, Dimitri said, "Oh man, this is all right up my alley. Tantric spiritual practice has been so instrumental to me for things you mentioned." Yeah, I believe Joseph has shared. He explained some of the tantric practices, and I do believe it. I do believe you're correct, Dimitri. It does match up. This is all right up my alley. Yeah, it does match up, man. Um, but yeah, I think there's two versions of this. Um, you have the phallic nature as penetration, and then you have the phallic nature as a charity. Um, and you can actually, I will say this: your sexual behavior is your spiritual metaphor. And just to be really explicit, meaning like there's a lot of men that care about their dick size, rather than the fact that that is actually not their true phallic nature. Your true phallic nature is actually the substance itself, and that's not the penis. That is actually the sperm, and the sperm itself has an ontological character of charity, um, and it's the fact that it has the ability to create something. Uh, so you can see how this all becomes twisted in the cultural feedback loop about people care more about, you know, how good they can give sex, how big their dick is, how everything is like that. But you see, that is actually missing the point. The whole point of the sexual nature is to create something. And it's to make space for something. In the sexual life, it's to make a human being, basically. That's really the function of it, to make a human being. Um, the Yes, creation is seen as a hassle. We need a pill for that. Yes, creation is seen as a hassle. Um, but I will say this: that for those people that can't see it, that can't understand, like what I'm saying is that when you practice some type of refraining, when you close when you close a sexual door, the spiritual door opens. It actually has no the that all that energy has no room. It's got to go somewhere else. It's kind of like when you become blind and your other senses become more exaggerated, more keen. And so, again, if you want, to me, I've been practicing, I've been doing this stuff too, and you start to realize that all this energy that is built up in the phallic nature is that once you close a door, it has to go somewhere else. And the thing is, it always has to channel up higher. And so this is going to manifest in the ontological charity, your more spiritual nature, and I think Dimitri will understand this, the tantric spiritual practice. It's very real, and that energy has nowhere else to go if you close that sort of physical sexual door, or if you refrain from it. Um, you do create something, and in essence, it actually has the potential to create your own manhood, to become a man. Um, I think recently uh, I came across a video about a woman talking about how, men like stuck on like certain like sexual things is kind of like a baby, like, with a bib. Every time like they want some type of self-soothing, they need that bib. Um, and really the whole point of growing up is to go without that bib, that that self that self-soothing. um, and you could really think about the whole cultural feedback loop is on this self-soothing thing, right? Like, I want good sex, I want, a big dick or something like that. It's all about this self-soothing attitude, and it's really misses the whole point of the ontological character of the phallic nature. The phallic nature is really, in its, my opinion, in its like pinnacle of spirituality, is a state of charity, a dialectical situation of constant poverty, of giving. Because how else can you make room for a human being? How else? How else do you have a relationship with any other human being if you can't even give up pride to some extent? If you can't give up your self-soothing things, um, how? If you're constantly affirming, right? But yeah, let's see. Just to read some comments here. Dimitri said, "Open love, faith without expectations." Yeah. The masculine is a container for the feminine to open up. Requires presence, connection, ontological charity. Yeah, I agree. Lozzie says, "Yeah, creation is seen as the house, so we need a pill for that." Yeah. Yeah. I think the pill situation, um, again, it's, in my opinion, it's the loss of the God orientation or the God framework. I mean, you're right. Like, the culture is right, right? When you have no God, there's no point in, having a baby, basically, right? The world's too cruel. The world's too harmful. Uh, I'm a poor mother or I'm a poor father, so might as well just, uh, not have a baby because I can't survive and I'm not good enough and I'm not. You see that, but you see the whole cultural framework is that when the person uses themselves as an end, everything ceases, right? Abortions, relationships, divorces. Um, there's no point because you're using yourself as an end. So if it's in the concept of I can't provide, I can't take care of a child right now, then yes, abortion actually makes perfectly rational sense. But with a God orientation, it's not that you can't provide. Actually, it's a given that you can't provide, but it's that God can provide, right? It's that faith that God can provide and God will provide. And that's the reason why men and women were having children. And that also children were seen as blessings, not as a burden on society or a burden on you. So there is this difference between, again, this having this mindset of end versus means, which depending on which position you take, I mean, if you take a position of ends, then yeah, a lot of the decisions are perfectly rational. Abortion, keeping your pride over a woman abusing you, everything. It just everything makes sense. Um, okay, let's see. Let's read more comment. Dimitri said one of the first pointers we learned at the tantric retreat was at a few weeks ago was how to serve. Reciprocal serving is the basis for mature sexuality. Yeah, I agree. Um, a man is not needy because his poverty is the source of his giving. Yes, I agree with that too. Porn is fundamentally infantile because it's just autoerotic mental fixation of excess. Yes. Yeah, I think I saw a video the other day. It was a woman critiquing this. She's like, how porn is basically just this self-soothing situation, and I think there's even like humorous videos about certain men like making jokes about like why deal with a woman when you can just watch porn and just get your fix. Um, so again, this getting your fix, getting your end is further affirms the division between the sexes, and it actually strips us from getting to know one another in a real sense. Like, what can the energy be used for when closing that door? Can one use it for anything he desires? I think when you have the mindset of using it for anything he desires, it's you get caught up you get caught up in you can get caught up in ends. But I will say that when you close that door, it's I don't know how to explain it, but it's like natural. You will start to think a little bit differently. You will see that your state, your nature starts to incline more towards like a spiritual kind of thinking. Um, let it flow as it goes type of stuff. uh, well, I will say this, that yes, when you close a door, another door has to open. That's basically how forceful the sexual nature is. Another door has to open. I guess it's more about seeing how does that door open. Um, but it's important to realize that even when you start refraining and putting yourself in states of poverty, it's always a dialectical situation. The whole point is to never actually stay in that level that you're at. The whole point is to actually learn again how to refrain, learn again to uh, surpass the next obstacle. Basically, what I'm saying is when you close that door, you'll find a higher elevation, but you're gonna run into an obstacle. It's just a given that you're gonna run into an obstacle, and it's important that you don't stay there. It's important that we never stay where we're currently at. It's important that we always have a dialectical relationship with our poverty, because if you become content, then you're full, basically. Um, and it becomes a self-soothing thing. Like even the idea of looking down at people because they still, you know, have that same door open and they didn't close it. It You can fall into like the same type of pride. Um, Actually, if you read Saint John of the Cross, was it, I think the Dark Night of the Soul or Dark Journey of the Soul, something like that. Saint John actually depicts how every every situation that you go through, every level has its basically perverse and productive spiritual um, elevation. So, and this is kind of where I got the idea of like the phallic nature, right? The perverse side is this kind of like invasive penetration, but the more spiritual elevated level is the ontological charity of it. This state of poverty, creativity, you could say. Um, So everything has its like two sides of the same coin kind of thing. One's the perverse sides. One's actually the side that's going to help you go to the next elevation, you know. But I think that's why it's always important to have some type of guidance on that. Because if you're just doing this, all willy nilly, uh, you're gonna you're kind of gonna fall into your own traps and like unconscious whims. Um, and so on. So it's but yeah, that's really the basis of what I wanted to talk about today. So glad you guys watched. Uh, all right. Well, you guys take care.